What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the TCL 4X 5G and going over whether or not it's still a good phone to buy in 2023. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. Now, the TCL 4X 5G is a really affordable 5G phone that you can get through several different prepaid carriers, including TracFone and Straight Talk, and going for about $149, oftentimes quite a bit less than that. For what it is, I do think it actually provides a lot of value. With this phone, we're getting a 6.52-inch LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 320, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So while on one hand not having like the best display in the world, on the other hand, considering what it is, I do think things actually look pretty good. Despite only having a 720p resolution, we are getting a decently sharp image here. The colors and brightness in general look pretty nice, and at 6.52 inches with a 20:9 aspect ratio, the size and dimensions are pretty good too. So if you're watching the occasional video every now and then, or using your phone to browse the web or use social media or something like that, no matter what you're doing, for the average user, I do think you will get a pretty good experience here. Now with this phone, we're getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. So on one hand, definitely not like an insane amount of storage, but on the other hand, for a phone like this, I mean, I've seen phones in this price range or even a little bit above that only have 32GB. So considering that, if you are looking for a really affordable device that has a decent amount of storage, then I do think considering the other options you can get around this price, you will be pretty happy with this phone. And honestly, for the average user, even in this day and age with files getting larger and larger as time goes on, as long as you're mindful of what you're putting on your phone, and you make sure to offload stuff like photos and videos onto a microSD card whenever you get the chance, I do think 64GB is still going to be perfectly fine for most people. For security features, the TCL 4X 5G does have Face Unlock, as well as a fingerprint scanner right here on the back, so more of a classic spot here. But real quick, let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive. No issues at all. Now, taking a look at the camera setup here, with the TCL 4X 5G, we got a typical water drop notch for the front-facing camera. As far as the design goes, I want to say it's going to be pretty much the same for most phones in this price range. But with this phone, since the bezels are decently thin, it definitely doesn't look too bad. Now, this camera is 13 megapixels, and then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 16 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra-wide camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. So definitely nice that we're getting a bunch of different features, including an ultra-wide camera and a macro camera, because in this price range, seeing a phone for less than $200 that has both an ultra-wide camera and a macro camera is definitely a nice thing. And keep in mind, even though this phone doesn't have a depth sensing camera, in my experience, portrait mode still works perfectly fine. Now, as far as the photo quality goes, this of course is going to be a little subjective, but in general for what it is, I do think the pictures this phone takes are pretty good. On one hand, if you have really high expectations and you're really taking photos all the time, then yeah, you're probably going to want to spend a bit more and get something that has a better camera. But on the other hand, for your average, typical daily use, if you're taking a couple pictures here and there to send to friends and family, for example, or even a few Instagram posts or something like that, for the average user, I do think the quality is going to be at least good enough. And in general, as long as you don't have super high expectations, I do think the camera setup here will get the job done. To give you an idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the camera of the TCL 4X 5G. And again, for a really entry-level phone like this, I mean, I personally got it for like $80. So considering that, for what it is, I definitely do think it has a pretty good camera. And if you're really looking for something to do the bare minimum with, but you also do want to be able to take good pictures whenever you need to, I feel like for that kind of situation, while obviously the camera isn't really the most amazing out there, considering it's only a $150 phone, for what it is for the average user, I do think it will get the job done. Now, when it comes to the RAM and processor, that's another area where this phone is actually really impressive for what it is. With the TCL 4X 5G, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 480 5G processor. So of course, first of all, as the name suggests, this is in fact a 5G phone. So if you are looking for 5G connectivity, but you really don't want to spend a ton of money on your phone, then honestly for the price, I feel like this is one of the better options. In my experience, while not being the most lightning fast phone ever, for a really cheap, affordable phone, it definitely is going to get the job done for most situations. If you're doing stuff like browsing the web, using social media, maybe playing a game or two or watching a video, really no matter what you're doing, as long as you're not going to be on your phone all day, doing more demanding activities like video editing or high performance gaming, for the more average kind of use that most people are typically using smartphones for on a daily basis, I do think the TCL 4X 5G will get the job done. Now, I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 5. And here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these. And that's going to give you a better idea of whether or not this phone's going to be an upgrade for you. But in general, I will say, compared to a lot of phones that are honestly even like double or triple the price. The TCL 4X 5G, while maybe not necessarily being faster, is definitely at least comparable still, which again, for a phone that I personally got for $80, but goes at full price for around $149, is definitely really impressive. So if you are looking for something more affordable, but you do want to make sure your phone also has decent performance, then I do think in general you will be happy with this phone. Now for the battery, the TCL 4X 5G has a 4500 mAh battery, so not quite 5000, but honestly, in this price range, I've seen phones that have 3000 mAh batteries. So in the grand scheme of things, if you are looking for a phone that has a decent battery, despite maybe not being the absolute best option, you're really not gonna go wrong with this phone either. In my experience, the battery does last for a decent amount of time. And for most people, even if you're using your phone all day, you're probably not gonna have to charge it until the end. And when it comes to charging speeds, for most people, you're most likely not gonna have a problem there either. Now with this phone, when it comes to software, unfortunately, the TCL 4X 5G does only have Android 11, which at this point, considering this is 2023 and we are on Android 13 now, it definitely is a little outdated, and I just updated this phone today, so I know for a fact it doesn't have Android 12 yet. And at this point, I mean, considering it's a track phone, I'm guessing it's probably not going to get it. So if the software is more important to you, then you are probably going to want to skip this phone. And honestly, at this point, I feel like every new smartphone should have Android 12 at least, if not Android 13. So yeah, if the software is an important factor for you, definitely keep this in mind. But maybe on the other hand, you're looking for something, again, for more of the bare minimum, and you're really not concerned about having the latest and greatest software or anything like that, then in that case, keep in mind, things do run decently smoothly on this phone. So even though having Android 11 in 2023 is really too bad, it's not like this phone's gonna have any performance issues because of it. Now another thing about this phone that is definitely a little too bad, but also really not surprising given the price range, is that with the TCL 4X 5G, this phone does not have NFC. So if you like to make contactless mobile payments using Tap and Pay, then keep in mind, you won't be able to do that with this phone. So if that feature is important to you, then you're definitely gonna wanna get something else. Now again, considering this phone is a $150 phone, it's definitely not surprising to not see NFC here, but considering there are some phones that are coming out that are maybe around $100 or so that do actually have NFC, at this point in 2023, while we're not seeing a lot of them, we are starting to see more and more affordable phones that do have the feature. And since Tap and Pay is getting to be so widely used, I definitely think it's nice to at least have the option to use it. But all the same, if you don't ever see yourself using NFC, then this might not matter to you. Now, taking a look at the overall design, for a more entry-level phone, the TCL 4X 5G does have a more generic look to it, with a slightly thicker bottom bezel and a water drop notch for the front-facing camera. I want to say pretty much every phone in this general price range is going to look almost exactly the same. But that being said, on the sides at least, the bezels are decently thin, so it does look at least reasonably modern. And in general, the phone has a kind of slim design, so it's not like it's going to be uncomfortable to hold or anything like that. Now, one thing I really don't like about this design is the assistant button right here. Now, technically, you can disable it, and if you do have the phone and you want to know how to do that, definitely check out the video description, where I will be linking to my tips and tricks video for this phone, where I do go over that. But in general, I feel like this button is so unnecessary. I mean, if you really want to get to the assistant, all you have to do is press and hold the home button, and it's going to show up anyway, so it really just doesn't make sense to have a dedicated button for it. And I mean, the button would be cool if you could get it to do something else, like maybe open your camera or something like that. But unfortunately, that's not the case with this phone. And I feel like at this point in 2023, really only cheaper phones have it. So having this button really just kind of makes it feel a little bit more cheap and a lot less premium. But aside from this, again, the design is decent. And while this phone is made entirely of plastic, the fingerprints don't show up too badly. And it also has a decent-ish amount of weight to it. So overall, the build quality is pretty good. And at the end of the day, most people are probably going to be using a case anyway. So overall, when it comes to the phone's appearance and materials, it's probably really only going to matter so much. But in conclusion, is the TCL 4X 5G still worth buying in 2023? Now on one hand, for what it is, being such an affordable device, this phone does actually still provide quite a bit of value. And because of this, I am going to say yes. But that being said, I feel like there are a lot of people who are probably going to want to skip this phone. The reason I say this is because, first of all, again, having Android 11 is definitely disappointing. I mean, at this point in 2023, while not that many phones have Android 13 yet, most phones at least have Android 12, so getting Android 11 at this point is definitely going to leave you with a more outdated software. And I feel like if you're going through the trouble of getting a new phone in the first place, this is definitely going to be a letdown. In addition to this phone not having NFC is definitely disappointing too, because at this point, again, Tap and Pay is becoming more and more popular and widely used, and sure, you may not use it now, but maybe you want to in the future. If you have this phone and decide you do want to use Tap and Pay, you're going to have to get a completely different phone. So having at least something that does have NFC, so even if you don't use it now, you'll have the option to use it if you decide to, is definitely a nice thing. And at this point in 2023, and especially into the future when NFC becomes even more popular, it's definitely important to think about. But on the other hand, again, this phone retails for around $150, $100. I personally got it for $80, and for an $80 phone, getting 64 gigabytes of internal storage, a camera setup that not only takes good pictures, but also has both an ultra-wide camera and a macro camera, and getting really impressive performance is definitely not stuff you typically see in this price range. So at the end of the day, if you're not too concerned about getting NFC or the latest software, but you do want a phone that has good performance, a decent display, a good amount of storage, and a really nice camera, then in that case, the TCL 4X 5G is probably still going to be worth considering for you. Now once again, if you do want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where we'll be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Khalipa's Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.